Now, last week, Israeli Prime Minister Benjamin Netanyahu said Israel intended to take control of all of Gaza. And in a rare press conference with foreign journalists in Jerusalem yesterday, he defended the plan, even as senior UN officials warned that the move risked unleashing another calamity on a territory already experiencing starvation. Pure and simple is what they say. Let's listen to what Netanyahu had to say.
Our goal is not to occupy Gaza. Our goal is to free Gaza, free it from Hamas terrorists. The war can end tomorrow if Gaza, or rather if Hamas lays down its arms and releases all the remaining hostages.
Now, Reem and Henry, look, I mean, it's not just the UN, but as you'll be aware, in Israel itself, waves of protests taking place. Going to you, Henry, before we come to what President Trump had to say about this. I mean, you know, it's difficult to know, to say the least, on top of the horror, you know, horror laid on horror, what the end game is here.
Well, this is why we're seeing a massive split between leaders of the IDF and the Netanyahu administration. I mean, we've seen a series of high-profile resignations. There's been quite a bit of dissent. We saw those huge demonstrations in Israel over the weekend. And when Benjamin Netanyahu says, we don't want to occupy Gaza, we want to free Gaza, well, the suspicion is, not suspicion because it's been said out loud, to free it of its people, to get rid of them, to drive them into another country, to ethnically cleanse them. I think most fair-minded people would say a very powerful response had to be visited on Hamas after the atrocities of October the 7th, 2023, and that was done. The top tier, the top 2-3 tiers of its leadership, both in Gaza, in the Lebanon, in Iran, have been killed, they've been wiped out. One wonders who is there, who's still there to fight Israel.
Talking about the leaders of
Hamas.
The leaders of Israel, the Shin Bet, Secret Service, head of the military, saying, you know, you've won pretty much all of your objectives.
What more do you intend to do? You're destroying our reputation abroad, and you're killing more and more people who are defenseless. It's a turkey shoot.
And as you know, most people you're talking about killing people. Let's call it what it is. It's women and children, chiefly. Reem, you know. On the other hand, people saying, and certainly Netanyahu himself, look, we don't want permanently to occupy it. When he was asked last week, he said he would hand it over in some ephemeral way to perhaps Arab governance, but you can't have Hamas in power?
You can't, and of course a lot of the polling does suggest that there is a lot of support for Hamas within Gaza. I mean, it's absolutely horrendous what's going on. It's disgusting. It's so sad. I don't think anybody can look at those photos of starving children and not feel hugely upset as a result of what's going on. I think we have to have a conversation about how this war could end. October 7th was an absolute disgrace, what they had done to those particular people. And I think that the language I'm using is even not harsh enough. So I think that we have to be very clear about how we're going to, in the long term, look at peace in the Middle East. And I don't think that the solution is to be negotiating with a terrorist organisation.
Well, I mean, that's the one who's there. That's the one who's that's the organisation that's negotiating. Some say in circumstances where, as you say, they shouldn't be, but certainly in Qatar.
Because Hamas don't care about people. They are more than happy. They are literally terrorists. They are more than happy to use Palestinian people as human shields. They are more than happy to increase the amount of casualties.
But Rima, what we have to understand is they come from that people. They haven't come from somewhere else. They haven't come from Egypt. They haven't come from Syria. They are people born and raised of that country. They see themselves as resistance fighters. An awful lot of people in Gaza hate Hamas, but they're under control of Hamas. But I don't think they want to be liberated by Netanyahu at 10,000 feet, sending drones to kill them.
But they will never be liberated by terrorists.
Well, this is a story about the UN and its comments and the impact it might be able to have. As most people know, the reality is the only person that can get on the phone to Netanyahu and make any meaningful difference is President Trump, and that's what international leaders know and court and say as well. And last Tuesday, Trump was asked whether he would support Israel. Just have a listen to what he had to say.
I know that we are there now trying to get people fed. As you know, $60 million was given by the United States fairly recently to supply food, and a lot of food, frankly, for the people of Gaza. So that's what I'm focused on. As far as The rest of it, I really can't say. That's going to be pretty much up to Israel. Yeah, please.
So pretty much up to Israel. I mean, not much sort of clarity.
No,
there,
well,
right?
there never is with Trump these days, and he's getting worse, month by month. I mean, he's essentially devolved it over to Benjamin Netanyahu, who's in his ear. He flatters him. He says, "You're our greatest supporter." And when you consider the Gaza Humanitarian Foundation was set up as a joint venture between the United States and Israel, and about 1,400 people at least have been killed while seeking food. But Netanyahu said yesterday it was Hamas who's killing them without evidence whatsoever, or says it's Hamas who's looting them, and the United Nations and lots of other entities on the ground, because let's remember journalists aren't allowed to operate freely there. In fact, 5 Al Jazeera journalists were killed only yesterday at the Al-Shifa hospital. Well, who are we to believe?
Again, before we come to the impact here, some suggestion about those journalists who are operating on the ground tragically killed. The Israeli government say not tragically killed.
Yeah, so it's interesting that the sort of propaganda that has been discussed within Israel itself. I mean, the IDF have basically said that these Al Jazeera journalists were Hamas members, Hamas supporters, when there is absolutely no evidence of that whatsoever. I am really, really concerned by the fact that they targeted journalists specifically. Right. I don't know where that has ever happened before. Of course, journalists have become, unfortunately, collateral damage. But yesterday, the IDF actually targeted the tent where the journalists were, which I don't think has ever happened, surely breaks huge amounts of international law.
Well, what goes on there obviously has a significant impact here. And over the weekend in London, hundreds attended a Palestine Action demonstration in Parliament Square, where 532 people were arrested for supporting the banned group. Around half of them, that's 259, were aged 60 and above, including almost 100 people who are in their 70s. Some 522 arrests were for displaying a placard in support of a proscribed organisation, contrary to Section 13 of the Terrorism Act. And amongst the people arrested were Sir Jonathan Porritt, 75, a former government advisor who said he'd long been concerned about the erosion of civil liberties under successive governments. I mean, these are older people, not young people.
People with life experience, not kind of naive fools wandering around wanting to destroy capitalism, bash the patriarchy, all of that stuff that people often characterise as loony left. These are people often middle of the road who've given great service, like Jonathan Porritt has, to the King. Of course, he was an advisor on environmental affairs. And they say, this is wrong. This is a group which wants to raise the alarm. It has done some criminal damage, and people are being processed through the courts as they should be. But it's the first time that an organisation that is dedicated to raising an alarm through criminal damage, through direct action, has been proscribed as a terrorist organisation like Hamas or Al Qaeda.
Yeah, so I think it's interesting. So I believe fundamentally in freedom of expression, and I think that putting Palestine Action in the same group as Al Qaeda, Hamas, ISIS is quite frankly absurd, because it is simply untrue. That being said, I think the people that are protesting over the weekend, the reason why a lot of them are older is because they're unemployed. They've nothing better to do.
What?
They're going to stand there. They've got nothing better to do. They're going to stand there with a placard, thinking that's going to have any kind of impact whatsoever on what's going to happen in the Middle East.
One of them said, well, quite a few said retired doctor, retired anaesthetist, retired surgeon.
Yeah, so they've got all the time in the world.
But you say unemployed. No, they're given 40
nothing.
years service, paying taxes so we can be here and be free.
Well, indeed, and they've got all. This is my point. They've got all the time in the world to.
That doesn't diminish what they're saying.
The issue I have.
It's an open society, a free society.
Oh, totally. And I believe in free speech, as I just said. I don't believe that Palestine Action should have been prescribed. Yeah. What I have said, however, is that as a result of that freedom of expression, you've seen people that are idle. They have nothing else to do with their day, absolutely. And then what they're doing is they're standing with a placard and they think that's going to have any impact whatsoever on what Netanyahu and Hamas do.
Would have a lot to say to you about that one. People out there, not just as it were, campaigning for what's happening and being activists what's happening in Israel, Palestine, but also, also about civil liberties as well. I'm going to move on because this is